Alright. I can see the question written all over your face. Why would someone call an assassin on themselves, you would ask? And... sorry, it just makes me happy to know someone is still innocent enough to actually ask something like that. But seriously, just look around. At you, at me, at all of us here in these streets. When was the last time you saw the sun? Even if you lived in the upper city in the highest towers, you'd maybe get 2 sunny weeks in a year, as it broke through clouds of pollution. When was the last time any one of us had holiday? Or, hell, not even a holiday, but a decent lunch that wasn't just deep-fried, tasteless starch with sugar water to wash it down. You can't even hope to have a brighter future with the kids one day, because, ask yourself, when was the last time you even saw a kid? Ever since Starch Cola passed that bill that made all children their property, they all get confiscated as soon as they're born and turn into these damned corporate janissaries. Teach to worship the company before they even learn how to walk or speak. They'll return here one day to replace us in our offices, but won't even know who we were, and they won't care either. Not like we're going to see their return. Let's be real, with all the shit in the air and the water, we're all carrying probably a bunch of tumors within us. The closer to the streets we live, the more cancerous we are. And hell, all of us are probably slowly dying anyway from dozen cases of various vitamin deficiency, and even after we clock out one last time, the company is not done with us. Cause unless you purchased yourself a platinum post-mortem package, they're going to drag your lifeless corpse to the recycling vats, toss it in, and then turn you into shoes or paint or bars of soap. Remember when the bad guys did that in the war? Yeah, well, they only did it to some people. Starch Cola is far more egalitarian and will squeeze all profit it can from our bones. So you see now? You see how some people would like to just remove themselves from all of this? But how? Join the rebels and live in the sewers or polluted swamps on the mainland and subsist on radioactive rats? Go to the continent and get executed as a spy? No, not many ways to leave, except the permanent way out. But the thing is, they can't even do that. Oh no, to leave the company's employ before your time is considered a serious crime. How can they profit off of you if you're gone, after all, right? And so there are these fines, deadly, life-destroying fines, for either trying to leave or actually leaving. Anyway, think, what does it matter? If you're gone, you're gone. No fines can catch you on the other side. Well, yes, but they can catch your relatives, your next of kin, or even your co-workers or neighbors, because starched lawyers will say that they had responsibility to keep you profitable for as long as possible. So leaving on your own terms is not allowed, so some people start to think about ways to circumvent that, and that is what I thought that happened to Laura. Maybe she just had enough of it all, but had enough decency to care for others on her way out. But there was an issue. Her emails. Sure, I could delete them from her computer, but the company had its own databases, and if the lawyers saw her schizophrenic ramblings to herself, they would immediately assume her fault and slap a fine on someone anyway. So, while I could do nothing for Laura Van Dyke, I could still at least help other people to not pay for her mistakes. And if I wanted to do that, I needed to find the person who pulled the trigger. Because even if Laura asked them for it, it was still a murder, and would give starched lawyers a pause in court. So, in a way, it was a case like any other. Find the murderer and bring them to justice. Except this time, possibly, someone who was still alive could actually benefit from all this mess. So, I had my job cut out for me. Oh, and before you think I'm all doom and gloom, let me tell you that I don't actually have even a gram of respect for all those who give up, and I don't understand them. Sure, life is shit, but newsflash, it always was shit. It probably always will be shit. Sometimes it may be hard to roll out of bed in the morning, sure, but that is not an excuse to throw everything away. Sure, we won't change the world, but we may do something to make at least one thing better. Give up, and it's the copos and slave drivers that win. The world is in the shitter precisely because people gave up. But you're not here for a lesson on morality. So, on to the case. I was already having some ideas on how to approach it, but I wanted to go through usual suspects first. As I said before, in most cases the victim is somehow connected to the killer, and I felt like I had a prime suspect as I went through Laura's emails. In there I found a message with some vague complaints about her work from a fella named Ben Schmidt, and after I witnessed those corporate cultists, I immediately thought that he could be one of them, trying to punish Laura for not working hard enough for the glory of the company. Problem was, there was nothing inside that could link to him. I spent well over an hour in that apartment, and all I could get were some prints from the door, from the outer side to be precise, which was not the best clue. Still, it was better than nothing. Sometimes people tend to approach their would-be victims up close only to chicken out at the last moment and back off to do the dirty at a distance. And maybe, I thought, one of the 2 odd prints I found at the doorframe could be that Schmidt guy. Or, if nothing else, maybe I could find his own emails, or the man himself, and verify my hunch personally. Obviously, though, I had no idea where he lived, but I knew he worked together with Laura in a company called Presidio Incorporated. That's a start, I thought. Not the best start, though, not for a case like that. Ideally, if the broken window was still there, I could maybe figure out the trajectory of the bullet and follow it, but without it, I really had no other leads. So, Presidio Inc., one of the many offices in the city, the kind I used to work in just a few days ago, filled to the brim with data input slaves, working day and night making spreadsheets for something most of them have never even seen in their lives. It was late in the evening when I arrived, so everyone has already left and the doors were locked. And this was not an apartment building. Starch Cola took its security far more seriously in buildings where the wage slaves worked. Multiple cameras, motion detector sensors, and even bloody automated turrets. That's right, you trespass on company grounds and you have to be ready for a barrage of live ammunition ripping you to shreds. The turrets had exactly 0 facial recognition software in them, so, say if you forgot something in the office, you had to wait until official opening hours, or risk getting shot dead. All that meant that I wasn't really eager to break into the office, but fortunately Starch Cola's own policy helped me out there. There was a vent cover on the wall in the corridor, and I assumed that it led somewhere into the office I was trying to get into. Now, I remember the days when air ducts were just that, just small tunnels for airflow, but with all the smog and pollution outside, even Starch Cola realized that people needed some better air quality inside their workplaces. Otherwise, we'd all just drop dead within weeks, and even our corporate overlords vaguely understood that they can't exploit their workforce if it's pushing up daisies. So, almost every building was outfitted with a bunch of massive ventilation systems and air scrubbers that filtered out most of the awful stuff outside. And because of that, these new vents had to be wide enough to, say, allow a determined old police officer to crawl through them. And the airflow really was good. There was not even a particle of dust inside, which was good, but the air was blowing so hard it was damn freezing, so not so good. Also, another issue. These vents were all added to already existing buildings after Starch Corporation ruined entire ecology, and that meant that they had to place them in creative ways. In other words, each vent was a damn labyrinth that snaked up, down, left, right, and everywhere, a dozen times before actually reaching anything. I was stuck there for like 50 minutes before I found an exit, and when I did I realized I was in a wrong office. So, back into the metal, claustrophobic tunnel I went, until I finally found myself a path to Presidio office. Fortunately, the lights were off, and as I mentioned before, all those fancy facial recognition cameras sucked absolute dick when it came to spotting him in the dark. Motion sensors were another thing though, but fortunately almost every office had its own security fuse box. So all I had to do was to figure out where the motion sensor was facing, open up the lock, and then turn everything off. And just like that, I was safe. For a while at least. Eventually, all security would turn itself back on automatically. At least, Corp security was smart enough to realize there should be a backup system like that. but I still had a good half hour to myself, and an entire office to go through. But I'm not going to drag this one out. Long story short, my hunch was wrong. Ben Schmidt indeed worked there, but his prints didn't even remotely fit the ones I found on the door. As I checked his PC, I found nothing incriminating. His emails to Laura were just some motivational bullshit he sent to everyone else. Maybe it was his job. I did check everyone else in the office, but I didn't find anything even remotely incriminating. But I did find another reason someone might have wanted Laura dead. She was an absolute slob. Her desk was covered in empty food boxes, slowly rotting away, and her workspace in general was drowning in trash. I felt a slight bit of understanding towards whoever pulled the trigger, but as I said, it was a dead wrong lead. Maybe, just maybe, it still was one of her coworkers who killed her, but I decided to put off investigating each individual person for later, and instead go out to check another idea that I had. See, whoever shot Laura had to use a gun. That is obvious, except Starch Collar really didn't appreciate regular people having guns. Weapon control laws were even stricter than in the olden days, and it was almost impossible for someone who was not from upper echelons of corporate society to have access to legal firearms. And since there were no fat cats around in our little district, the next option was that the killer got their weapons somewhere illegally. Not from the enforcers though, they used service pistols at best, and the wound in Laura's chest was too large for that. Now, someone, I thought, shot her with a rifle, and those were notoriously hard to find. Unless, of course, you knew about the black market. With all the things the corporate overlords outlawed, guns, pets, implants that don't contain corporate spyware, there was a thriving market out there for anyone willing to provide those goods to people. All I had to do was to find it, and I already had some idea where to look. So I marched out of the office building and went back into the tunnels under the city. And there, a few hours later, in one of the basements, I finally found a pawn shop. And while I thought about breaking in, I suspected it would not be necessary, because I saw something through the door, and instead I just politely knocked. "Hello there, I'd like to buy some ammunition," I said with the most eager, deranged smile I could muster, the very moment the doors opened. The bearded man who stood behind them visibly flinched. "No clue what you're talking about, mate. Besides, you wanna do business, I'll need a password from ya." "Daffodil," I said without hesitation. The bearded man looked shocked. "How the hell did you—" he started, but I just shoved myself inside. "I saw it written on the walls in at least 3 different places in this district alone, and right under a picture of a man in a thief mask. Not very subtle, that, John." He took a step back, his eyes widening with shock. "Well, the customers need to know how to find me, don't they? And besides, how do you know my name? Wait, I remember you. You're the cop that put me in this slammer all those years ago." "'Cause you were pushing drugs to school kids, John, and it looks like you got out easily anyway." "Yeah, after they confiscated all my product and all my money. If not for you back then, I'd be living in some high tower now. So fuck off." "No can do. Hey, peace, I'm not here for you. I didn't even know you were here until you opened the doors. I just need to check something with you." "How about you jump in the river and check whatever the fuck you want there? I'm not going to do any business with a badge. I have a reputation to keep." "Not a badge anymore. Not even an enforcer. They didn't want me. I'm just here as a private investigator. And trust me, as soon as you help me, I will leave, and you will never see me here again. And you may even help to catch a murderer in the process as well." "Murderer?" John asked, entire anger suddenly gone from him. Yeah, he was exactly like I remembered him. Back in the day, he was a bottom feeder of the criminal underworld, selling drugs and pornography to kids and stealing cash from vending machines. He was not a good man, but he was never violent, probably why he never made it far on the crime scene, and that was my opening. Yeah, a shooter, to be precise. Someone shot a woman to death, and since you can't really buy ammo on open market, I assume the killer had to buy it somewhere underground. Then, well, I found the underground, and you? Worry not, I will not mention you to the enforcers, and I can pay you for the information. The bearded man shook his head and motioned at me to get inside. He pointed at a small book lying on his desk. Just check in there, copper. I swear they always say it's for hunting or for personal security, but murder is bad for business. In olden days, I'd agree with him, but today, even if enforcers knew about his little smuggling den, they'd probably ignore it anyway. Too much effort for not enough reward. Still, I just nodded and immediately started going through the ledger. This is not particularly useful info, my man, I said after looking at the notes. Don't you have, full names of your customers written somewhere? He scoffed at me. No, I don't ask their names, and they all come here precisely because I don't ask. Alright, fair, I replied. That was oddly competent for a man like John. Could you at least maybe describe them? At least those people who bought ammo in recent days? Mate, I have astigmatism and I work in a dimly lit basement. Most of my customers are a blur to me. Hell, I only recognized you because of your voice. You still sound as pretentious as you did all those decades ago. In that moment, I really wanted to give in to the red mist in my head, but managed to restrain myself. So many problems in life wouldn't exist if you could just beat the shit out of people, and if they knew that if they did not behave, that beatdown would be just right around the corner. But no, life was not something that could be resolved with just fists. Fine. No more questions from me then. I'd ask you to find a real job and stop fucking around with all that illegal stuff, but I doubt you'd listen. You didn't listen back then. Better that than being a corpo slave. And, hey, sorry I couldn't help. I'll ask around if any one of those people who purchased ammo before comes back. I'll try to get their names as well. Look, I don't want anyone to associate me with murderers, got it? Sure, that would spook potential customers. Oh, fuck off, Badge, he mumbled and slammed the door behind me. But oddly enough, I was sure that if he'd actually figure out who the killer was, he'd tell me right away. Death was not the line he wanted to cross, at least not direct death. Selling crack to kids and wrecking their lives over the years, that was okay with him. Still, it was at least some minor step in the right direction in this case. At least, I hoped so. After all, the shooter could have gotten his ammo from somewhere else. I only found John's pawn shop because he made it easy to find. But if there were some more dangerous and less scrupulous supplies out there, they would no doubt be a lot harder to find. So, I have to admit I was a bit stumped. Not for the lack of leads, but because there were so many of them, but nothing to actually point to correct one. So as I clambered out of the basement, I mentally steeled myself for yet another round of checking every single person from the victim's address book. But then I heard a sound. From figuring out the case perspective, it was a great sound. From all others' perspectives, though, it was the worst possible one. A gunshot. Another one. And not a very distant one at that. Moments later, my radio chimed in as well. Dispatch, we got a firearm discharge reported. Same building as the last time, the voice said, and my mood sank below the bottom. Fuck, I failed. Whoever shot someone now shot someone else, because I was too much of a moron to find them before that. I just stood there, stunned for a second. But then this confusion was replaced with anger and determination, and I rushed to the site of the latest shooting. Same building, just another floor. And this time, I arrived just with the enforcers, so no pesky cleaners had a chance to ruin the crime scene for me yet. Of course, the enforcers themselves were fully capable, and probably eager, to shoot me dead if they caught me in there. After all, they would happily just write me off as the killer who was still hiding inside Victim's apartment. They'd probably even get a small bonus for that, but I did not care. They were lazy and corrupt, and I was angry at everything. so moments after they barged in through the door I snuck into the apartment to see what exactly happened there. And yeah, it was a gunshot alright. A woman lied crumpled on the floor in a growing pool of her own blood. Had to turn her around to see the wound, a massive blood-gushing hole in her chest. Hard to say what exactly caliber it was, only that it was large, but it seemed similar to the previous one. And it was fresh, happened less than half an hour ago. But most importantly, there was the most important piece of evidence that I was missing before, a hole in the window. Now that was something I could work with. But it was also odd. A bullet of such caliber should have shattered the entire window. Instead, there was just a single bullet hole and a tiny web of cracks around it. The shooter was either extremely lucky or extremely proficient at their job, and for my own sake I hoped it was the former. Because now I had a pretty good idea where the shot came from, namely, from the building just on the other side of the street. It was hard to know exactly from which apartment, but judging by how high on the window the entry hole was, it was safe to assume that it was either on the same level or more probably above. Good. Very good. Not good for Amber Cunningham, the poor second victim, but at least now maybe I could prevent the shooter from killing a third person. But I still didn't want to rush things, so I investigated Amber's apartment thoroughly, just in case. And, an odd thing, it looked like she too suffered from some mental issues. Had a note on her fridge to remind herself to take meds, written in a shaky handwriting of someone who forced themselves to take them. But nothing on her computer. Maybe, unlike Laura, she actually took her pills and didn't write emails to herself. Still, another small weirdness. One common associate living in one of the towers. Possibly nothing problematic, but finding connections like that can sometimes become useful later down the line. Now, you could say, of course, that I had no definite proof that these murders were connected, but come on. Both victims were shot with a similar caliber weapon, through their own windows, both overlooking the same neighboring building. Someone there was having a fun time with a rifle, and maybe, and it wouldn't be the first situation like that, he was making space for his friends to move in, so that they could see each other through the windows. The fact that Laura's apartment was immediately rented out could indicate someone was willing to pay a decent bank for it, and possibly also knew beforehand that there would be a free vacancy there. Sounds insane, I know, but as I said, things like that happened every now and then. So, into that neighbouring building I went. McLaughlin Towers it was called, and it was a bit of an ironic name, since it was one of those old-school brick buildings that was only 5 stories tall. Everything around it was taller. That was actually quite good for me, though. It meant that there were not that many apartments for me to check out. Of course, the problem was that it was middle of the night and people were in their homes. I could try to sneak in, but as you remember, last time I tried that I got shanked by some crazy lady. So I decided to, at first at least, only check empty ones, and wait for everyone to leave for work to properly investigate the entire building. I just hoped no one would end up dead in the meantime. I began my investigation from the upper floors, since the shot almost certainly came from there. First 2 apartments I checked were a bust. Someone was inside, so I had to retreat. But then I broke into number 403 and immediately found some dark, incriminating stuff. The person who lived there, a fellow named Harrison Reiter, had an entire stockpile of ammo hidden around his apartment. Pistol rounds, rifle bullets, even shotgun shells for hunting, as if there was anything but mutated deer to hunt outside of the cities where not a single forest was spared from logging companies. And the guy even worked in the same building as Laura, also at a Presidio company. My joy was short-lived though. Laura worked at Presidio Incorporated, and he worked at Presidio Technologies. Probably both parts of a larger parent company, but I now doubted they were co-workers. More still, he had a perfect view from his window to both Laura and Amber's apartments. All he had to do was open his own window, rest the rifle on the sill and pull the trigger. he lived high enough that it would be impossible to pinpoint exactly where the shot came from by potential observers on the street. There it was. I had a person who maybe didn't have a motive, but certainly had tools to commit the crime, and clearly enough criminal sense to acquire all that ammo stockpile. I didn't find a weapon though, but I was sure that if I found Harrison, I'd find the rifle too, or at least figure out where he stashed it. So as I said, suddenly everything fell neatly into place. All I had to do was find Harrison's office, wait for him to finish job, assuming he was there, otherwise I had to find him, and the case would be solved. And yet, I could not shake this awful, freezing chill going down my spine. A feeling that I was missing something vital to the case. I can't explain it, let's call it experience and leave it at that. Back in the day, I also sometimes dealt with cases where, all of a sudden, all clues pointed in one direction, only to end up being completely wrong, and now I felt the exact same thing. So, I devised a new plan. By the time I finished rummaging through Harrison's apartment, it was already morning. People, probably including Harrison, were already at work. So, I took a trip to his workplace, Presidio Technologies, to see if he was there. The receptionist wasn't particularly happy to talk to me, but I did some pantomime and pretended to be a secret corporate investigator, and learned that my potential guy did indeed come to work this morning, and was at his desk right now. Maybe he came in to avoid raising suspicions, but if he clocked in, it meant that he'd stay put for a few hours, and that gave me an opportunity to go back to McLaughlin Towers and check other apartments, which should now be empty of people who also began work. Except not all of them were empty. Harrison's neighbors were gone, but had nothing of interest in their apartment. Same in the other flat on his floor. But someone was snoring in the apartment directly below 403, and I decided to screw all safety and sneak in. Let me tell you, even in the dark I could sense that the place was a dump. The smell of old trash was everywhere, and I could feel bits of something under my toes. Made walking on the carpet louder than usual, but the lady who slept on the bed was out like a log. I took a look through their windows, and they too offered a clear line of sight to both victims. Didn't find any weapons though, or ammo, so I now felt a lot more confident that Harrison was the guy I was looking for. But then, a piece of paper on the kitchen counter caught my attention. On it, in shaky letters, someone wrote notes. Notes on people living in the opposite building. How they looked, how they dressed, when they came home from work, and what did they do afterwards. Some of the freshest notes even mentioned me wandering around the place. I swore out loud, and almost woke up the woman on the bed. Well, holy shit, what did I just walk into here? Sure, this could have been just some creep with a voyeurism fetish, but then I saw the last line on those notes. "Let's make things interesting," it said. Well, fuck me. Sorry, Mr. Harrison, it looks like I almost got you wrongly accused of murder. Not that you would ever learn about that, of course. But now I had to find out who even wrote that note in the first place. The first potential target was of course the sleeping woman, but fingerprints on the note and on the pen didn't match hers. I could immediately say that she wasn't living alone though, so after another few minutes of quietly going through their cupboards, I found out the name of her partner. Dalton Knight, working as a night shift security guard in a factory on the other side of the district, which meant that he was at home exactly when both murders took place. And that, as a security guard, he probably had access to some serious firearms. Well then, now we were getting somewhere. Now all I had to do was wait for this Dalton fellow to come back home and ask some questions. After kicking the shit out of him, that is. I waited around for a while, until I realized that I had no idea how this Dalton even looked. Checking the home computer was out of the question, since the woman behind me was getting a bit restless in her sleep. But at this hour, Dalton should be out of his work, so I could check his workplace and learn something more there. It was a bit of a trip, almost an hour through the freezing rain, but it was worth it. The factory only hired nightwatch security, so while I did get some sideways glances as I walked in, no one really stopped me from waltzing right into security office and downloading every file I could find, including Dalton's entire profile. There we go. Apparently, his manager considered him unmotivated and prone to daydreaming. Mate, sorry to break it to you, but in this day and age, that's all of us. But I had what I wanted, so I went back to McLaughlin Towers, and on the way there, I made a quick stop at the town hall. Because you see, I may not be a smart man, but even I can learn from pain. And after breaking into one apartment with 2 people inside and getting shanked for it, I now had an idea how to make the next attempt a bit safer for myself. It was time to play to my strengths and use experience from the olden days. And so, with 2 pair of handcuffs and a pocket full of lockpicks, well, technically industrial-strength paperclips, but no one had to know, I went back to Dalton's apartment. Before I walked in, I listened through the door. I was hoping that, as a night shift guide, he'd be asleep. No such luck, I'm afraid. I could hear him and his partner talking. Shame, I really hoped for an easy arrest there, but that is where the lockpicks came in. I already had the key to Dalton's apartment. Hopefully he didn't notice that it was missing from his kitchen drawer, but openly walking into a place where a guy who just shot 2 people dead seemed like a bad idea. So instead, I broke open the lock on the fuse box in the corridor and turned off power for the entire floor. Thank you, starch cola, for sun-obscuring clouds of pollution. It was early winter morning, and in the olden days, it would have been grey outside. Dark, but visible. But thanks to all the crap in the air, it was almost pitch black when the lights went out, and I used the opportunity to quietly open Dalton's door and enter. As expected, they were both confused, stumbling around in the dark. But I spent a good few decades wandering in the night, so while they couldn't see anything, I could. And what I could see was Dalton's partner right in front of me. She managed a quick, "What the?" before I stuck a piece of cloth in her mouth, swiped her feet from under her, and locked the cuffs on her wrists, all in one motion. It was all getting back to me now. Dalton heard it, though, and he worked night shifts as well and immediately navigated towards his lady friend, and met my fist going in the opposite direction. I heard a satisfying crack of a broken nose as he fell to the ground, and then I pounced on him like an elderly jaguar, rolled him on his back and cuffed him as well. Then I slammed both of their heads on the floor a few times. I have to say, handling suspects became a lot easier since words police brutality became nothing but an empty phrase. Then I walked back outside, turned on the power again, and went back into the apartment. "Who the fuck are you, you old bastard?" Dalton asked as soon as I entered. "I'm Batman," I growled. I really wasn't in the mood to explain myself to him, especially since, right there on the desk, directly in front of the damn door, literally the first thing anyone entering the place would notice, I saw a scoped hunting rifle. The guy had a damned sniper rifle right on his damn counter. Just how incompetent can one be? How sure of himself? How arrogant? "Well then, Batman, we didn't do shit to you, so leave us alone. If it's money you need, just take our wallets and go." I ignored him. Instead, I approached the rifle and checked it with my scanner. Yep, Dalton's fingerprints were there. The caliber matched the wounds on both victims. And on the kitchen counter were even more notes detailing life of people on the other side of the streets, and more daydreams about shaking them up a bit. "Look, you can take the rifle too, but you have to go to the black market to sell it," Dalton said. He wanted to add something more, but I turned to him with a look on my face that made him go silent. "Dalton Knight, you are under arrest for murder of 2 people and planning to kill many more. The enforcers will be here shortly to collect you. I should say that, for your own sake, you should do what they say, but I sincerely hope that you try to resist them." I tried to sound intimidating. To most people, this would be intimidating, but Dalton, he just laughed. But it was not a healthy laughter. "Tell me, "How did your day go, old man?" he asked suddenly, staring at me with crazed eyes. I did not reply, so he continued. "Because I went to work in the middle of the night. I stared at security footage for hours. I walked a patrol route between floors, and you know what? I did the same thing yesterday, and the day before that. Sometimes, if I'm lucky, I get to chase away some homeless fool from the premises, but for every other day this job is the same. Observe, patrol, day in, day out. For almost 2 decades now, every day looks the same. And then I come back home, look outside the window and see them. Just like me, day in, day out, the same routines, the same moves. It's all just so boring." Something snapped in me in that moment. Without a word, I walked up to Dalton and punched him in the face. "And this is your dumb excuse? 2 people are dead because you were bored?" I growled, but he just smiled at me in response. There was no light behind his eyes. "People? Who are you trying to fool here, old man? We are not people. We are machines, just made out of meat and not metal. Me, you, those 2 women I shot. No one cares if we live or die. Starch Cola took not only our lives, but our souls as well. When I shot them, I set them free. I showed them the way out of this misery our lives have become. I thought that it would be my new calling, my rebirth. But even as I pulled the trigger, I felt nothing." I punched him again, and again, without any words this time. This bastard not only thought he was saving people by killing them, he even felt like he should be rewarded for it with joy and happiness and inner accomplishment. I almost couldn't believe my ears when listening to this madman trying to justify himself. I raised my fist again, and then I lowered it. I remembered my own life just a few weeks ago, and was it really different from how Dalton described it? All I did was sleep, eat and work on constant repeat, just so I could pay rent and continue the cycle that I hated with all my heart. Hell, sometimes it was so mind-numbing that I felt like I lost entire months of my life. I couldn't remember a single moment from them, because they were all just the same. And how many times I daydreamed about just dropping all pretense and telling my corporate boss what I thought about him, with my mouth and with my fists. So in a way, I could see how someone like Dalton, a man who clearly lacked mental fortitude, could one day simply break and turn his murderous, intrusive thoughts into reality. I could see it, sure, but I could not accept it. Starch Corporation made our lives awful enough already, without us turning on each other for such pointless reasons. But I knew that this was how the corporate overlords wanted us to be. Broken, just like Dalton, who not only didn't consider his victims human, he didn't consider himself human being either. It's a strategy as old as history. A divided population or workforce is always easier to manage than a unified one. And I think that was what made me so angry. The fact that Dalton gave up on everything and became exactly what Starch Cola wanted him to be. It was pitiful, but mostly it was pathetic. So while I felt like I should feel at least some sympathy for him, I did not. "Well, boy, I can guarantee you that once you end up in Starch Prison, you will never be bored again," I said, finishing securing fingerprints. "But you know what? You going to jail for your idiotic stunt may actually help clear the names of your victims, so their families don't have to pay death fines." "Good. Then maybe all of this was worth something," he replied with a weak smile, his eyes still empty. I had no delusions. Dalton wouldn't survive a week in corporate prison. I wanted to say something to him, to maybe wake him up from his daze, but I could see that he wasn't listening. So I turned to his pink-haired wife, not to moralize. Pretty sure saying things like, "You should have seen this coming," wouldn't mean anything at this point. So instead I gave her some advice. "The enforcers will arrive soon. You didn't pull the trigger, and you won't be in my report, so they will only take away your husband. I suggest that you stay quiet, or you will end up in prison with him." As soon as I said it, though, her eyes darted to the rifle on the table. She was loyal, I could give her that. No, not in that way. Look, don't do anything stupid like leaving your own fingerprints on the gun. If you think Starch will put you in the same cell as your husband, you are mistaken. You may go to prison with your husband, but you will never see each other again anyway. And with that, I left to report my findings to the city hall. In theory, I should have taken the rifle with me to prevent her from ruining her life, but she was a grown adult, and I could not make a decision for her. And to be fair, after all the runaround this case turned out to be, I didn't really care all that much. Fortunately, it was close to the hall, so after almost 2 days of uninterrupted work, I could finally see a break on the horizon. Just a bit more, and I could afford a temporary place to stay and prevent my corporate execution. Just a bit more, I muttered as I walked along the street. And then... well, that is actually a good point. I could get the apartment to live in. But then what?